This is Digital Breakthroughs, putting the spotlight on cutting-edge digital marketing strategies for your business. With your host, CEO of industry-recognized digital marketing and social media agency, National Positions, Bernard May.
Welcome everyone to this month's episode of the Digital Breakthroughs podcast. Today we're going to be talking about what we can do when website rankings drop off. I can just see the dread that you're all feeling when you hear about rankings dropping off, but we have a great guest today. I'm excited to introduce our guest. Her name is Holly Miller Anderson, and Holly is a seasoned SEO strategist. In her career, she's worked at agencies, she's advised B2B and B2C brands. She's worked with startups, and most recently, she served as the SEO in-house product manager for Macy's.com and Bloomingdale's.com. Welcome, Holly. It's so great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you. It was a great intro.
Thanks. Today, we're going to speak about what you can do if your website's rankings drop off. But before we do that, I was wondering if we could rather talk about the positive side, which is the best practices of SEO, the pillars that we should consider when we are setting up an SEO campaign in the best possible light. And maybe you could just tell the listeners a little bit about what your philosophy is and what you think about when you're setting up a campaign from an SEO perspective to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of experience, working with different B2B and B2C companies, and as I said, going from agency to consulting. So I've really gotten to see quite a bit of a range with what works and what doesn't. But what I've come to find is the core pillars of what does work is something that was developed by Jessica Bowman, and she has a book called the SEO Playbook. I highly recommend it. And the best thing that I can say about this book is that it has a visual representation of what works, the pillars that are SEO. And every team in an organization plays a part in contributing to SEO's success, or they can detract from it. But in that way, you really want to be looking at the things that you have control over, as a marketing leader or an SEO lead within your company. And those things are, your content, your actual website content, your internal links, and how, which pages you're pointing to, how the page gets crawled and rendered. You can also be really looking at your information architecture. That's how your entire website is, put together in terms of your sitemap, how that's presented to both search engines and people when you have a sitemap page that people can look at as well. And I will say one of the more nebulous things, but one of the other things to really be aware of is user experience, right? This is becoming even more of a factor. People, if they can't easily navigate your website, they'll leave. So marketers really need to be aware of what device people are using when they're accessing their website. Is it a mobile phone or a desktop? And that's going to really guide the content that you provide and how your site is linked and how it's architected so that people can navigate it easily.
So this is so interesting, and especially when it comes to that user experience that you're mentioning in regards to content. So one of the questions that people ask, and you were talking about multiple devices, is a lot of people don't want to read information anymore. And, what is content? Because I believe that, when we speak about content, you think about text content, but that's not the only content that's out there. But what is considered good content? And maybe you could tell the listeners a little bit more about what you consider good content.
Yeah, it's so interesting because content right now, content is everything. It's anything that a business puts out onto the web. And so it can be, anything that you put onto your YouTube page. It can be things that, go onto social media. It can be your blogs. It's your email. It's the actual content that's on your website as well. It can be a podcast, right? So content is the thing that the consumer, can absorb that you put out there. And so in that regard, you as a marketer, and this is where SEO really comes in, is you have to understand how search engines will consume that content and help it to rank, and how people will consume it as well. So the written form of content is important because search engines they don't know what visuals are, they don't know what a video is. They can't watch the video, so you have to describe it for them. And same things with images. And so when you're thinking about content, you have to think about, how does the search engine need to understand what this content is and what it should be ranking for? And then how does the consumer want to see this as well? If they want a video, that's great, perfectly fine. But we're going to work in some elements in there to make sure that type of content is optimized for search engines as well.
So that's very interesting. So you're saying that content needs to be written for the search engines, but also has to be written for the end users as well. Mm-hmm. And the other area that we need to consider as well is that whole user experience, that user intent. So, okay, so we've written all this great content. We also know what the search engines are looking for in what you mentioned in regards to Jessica Bellman's book and this whole way that we set up the funnel and we set up the pillars of best practice SEO. Now let's talk about maybe the question or the topic of today's podcast, which is all about, okay, so you're in there, you've done some things that you believe are good, but you're going to drop in rankings. So first of all, like, how do you even know that, you've got to drop in rankings? I mean, what do our listeners do? Or like, what are these factors that kind of lead to a drop in rankings? How do you even know that you've had a drop in rankings?
Definitely. There's two pieces to that question that I want to make sure the users are aware of. One is the first piece, which is, how do you know? Well, if you're using any kind of tracking software like Moz or SEMrush, you can usually use those to track your URL and keyword rankings. You will see a drop in those rankings, and that will cause you to question and think about what's going on there. The other piece of it is, I really want to take a moment to define the difference between rankings, traffic, and conversions. It's really important to make sure you clarify, like, when you do see a drop happen, the rankings are really where you sit, where your listing actually sits on the Google search engine results page on desktop and mobile. Traffic is what you get to your website. Organic traffic is the free type that everybody wants in terms of SEO. There's also direct traffic and referral traffic. And conversions are really the actions that users will take on your site. Like, they will purchase something, they'll sign up for your newsletter, download a white paper, those kinds of things. So when you look and you say, that's why it's really important to understand the difference between, is my traffic decreasing or are my rankings decreasing? Those two things you can kind of tackle a little bit differently, but knowing at least which one is decreasing, depending on the tool that you're looking at, that's going to give you the understanding of, okay, how can we take action?
Wow. Okay. So we've got all these different things we've got to look at. And I think the first thing that our listeners probably find is, oh, we've got less leads. So that's the conversion side. And then you go back and like, oh, maybe I've got less traffic now. And then that all fits in with the ranking. So let's start out, if you don't mind, I'd like to drill into each of those areas because they're really interesting. How can a change to, what could people do to kind of mess up their environment or their website or whatever to impact the rankings and the traffic? And maybe we should start there.
Definitely. So I've kind of been thinking about it in terms of three factors, right? There's three basic reasons or hypotheses, if you will, for why rankings drop. And the conclusion I've kind of come to is it's one of three things, or maybe a combination therein, but it's either something changed on your site that you were responsible for, like your internal teams may have changed something, pushed some new content live, migrated a portion of the website and not the entire thing, those kinds of things. So you did something that's causing a change. Google did something. Usually that's considered an algorithm update. And unfortunately that happens a lot, but Google could change something, and that's when rankings can fluctuate. You can definitely see a lot of movement when that happens. And the third factor is something external in the market that is affecting your rankings. Case in point, it can be a global pandemic where people are changing their search behaviors and their buying patterns as well. They're home more often. So, those kinds of things can affect both traffic and rankings to your site.
Great. So maybe we should dive into each of those a little bit more deeply, if you don't mind. So the first one is you made a change to your website. What kind of changes typically impact, or could affect someone's rankings?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. There's so many different types of scenarios. I'll just give you kind of a couple that I've seen. It can be something as simple as a folder gets moved in your CMS or your content management system. That's a whole section of content for your website. If Google can't find that, then you're going to lose rankings for those pages. Code can be updated and pushed live that can break other pieces of code that have already been written, or it can get overwritten. So you're overwriting some of the other code. That certainly happened before, and you have to roll things back, and that can certainly affect your rankings. Other things, I've seen Googlebot, just being blocked from crawling and indexing important pages of your website because someone made a change to the robots.txt file. They forgot a slash, or they used disallow, and it's like it changes everything. It changes the way Google's crawling your site. So you have to be a good detective in a way to find the source of the problem. And the good news, though, is if these internal things do happen, if you have a really good open lines of communication with your team, across the company, you can usually trace it back to the source and figure out what went wrong or what changed, and then quickly take steps to kind of correct it.
So good. So Holly, so what I'm hearing you say is the first thing you got to look at is ask that question: did someone change something on the website? Your rankings fall off. You go back to your developer or anybody who touched your website and say, what did you change? And then you go through those different things. Did you move a directory? Did you update robots? Did you change a page or whatever? Okay, so that's really interesting. So the second part that you mentioned is this, and this is the part that I think freaks everybody out, is that Google made an algorithm change. And I know even in May, there was a core algorithm change that happened. And I believe there are a lot of changes that happen how many changes does Google make during a year? I know
thousands. They make thousands. That they can be small tweaks. It's almost like an earthquake, and I think I've heard it referred to that in a way. They make changes all the time. And the thing of it is, let's see, I was looking through the recent May 2020 broad core update, and it was super interesting to read the Webmaster blog on this, because it's still kind of being considered the same. Broad core update is like we're focusing on content, the quality of content, and the relevancy. So there's not much that changes there, but it certainly does affect different industries differently. And I will say that if you have the time, go check that article out. I think I tried to tweet it at one point. So if you follow me on Twitter at some point, you'll be able to find the article. But they have a really great list of self-evaluation questions in the article that can help you to kind of self-diagnose and ask your teams, is our content authoritative? Is this something that, we can really stand behind? Are we really providing value to the customer? Is this the best piece of content given that someone else has published content on that same topic? So really a good opportunity for website masters and people who work on websites, and also the contributors, the content, and the editors, to say, hold yourselves accountable and say, is this really the best quality? Does this deserve to be ranking as high as it does?
Okay, so that's great. And what we'll do is we'll take that link. Thank you so much. We'll put that link in the show notes so that everybody has access to it. So if I ask the question to my web developer, what have you done to the website? And they say nothing. So then the next thing we need to look at is that algorithm. Did Google have some kind of algorithm change? We'll refer to that link that you and those questions, and chances are Google has done something, because you were saying so many changes have happened. But then that last part is the third part, I guess, in this puzzle, is external. How do we know externally whether this has got nothing to do with the Google algorithm, it's got nothing to do with the web developer making changes to the website? So maybe you can talk to that last point, that third point.
Yeah, definitely. And it's almost like having to also diagnose whether an algorithm update, did or did not impact our site. And one of the things I do quickly try to remind people is to say, make sure you can validate that an algorithm update is moving through, moving through the web, because you can't point the finger at Google if they don't always confirm an update, but sometimes they do, right? So the May one has been confirmed, and so you can kind of benchmark a little bit off of that. With external factors, it is difficult to understand, what could be affecting my rankings. But I like to look across a couple of different tools, market insight tools that I happen to use that kind of give me some indication about consumer trends, or things happening in business landscape, just what might be going on in the world that might be affecting my rankings. So the 5 tools that I usually refer to are Google Trends. That's a free tool. It's fantastic. Something called Spark Toro, developed by Rand Fishkin. There's another tool called Glimpse. Another one, eMarketer. They have a really great newsletter, by the way, lots of data. And then Pinterest Trends is really interesting. So kind of being able to look across those different tools and say, is there a pattern? Has something changed? Is there something that has become a little more relevant, to consumers more recently? Those types of things may kind of give you clues as to where the attention is going on the web. So
that's fantastic. And again, we'll put all those different resources into the notes, because you've just brought up so many great ideas and so many great resources for our listeners. Most of our listeners have Google Analytics. It's a free tool that's on there, that most of their developers have implemented for them. Are there any questions or anything that they should be looking at as well on a consistent basis? What do you recommend?
Yeah, definitely. I think with Google Analytics, that is your traffic tool. And with Search Console, that's going to give you an indication of your rankings, because it will show you your impressions, right? So that doesn't translate into hard traffic. And so that's kind of why you maybe want to be looking across both of those 2 tools to see what's really going on. But the questions I like to ask myself when I'm in that tool is, at least within analytics, you say, what pages started receiving less traffic and when did that happen? When you can start to isolate that, then you can get a sense of, okay, was there something that someone changed, about those pages? Or was there an algorithm update that is in particular about, an aspect of our site that maybe is impacting things like user experience? Maybe we have some really heavy pages that are just not performing well. It could be something about, quality, or being more transparent with consumers about your products and your services, things like that. And when you're in Search Console, you want to ask the question rather, has the crawl rate decreased, and when did that occur? So if you're seeing, a decrease in kind of Google coming back to your pages and not crawling you as often, maybe you need to evaluate, are my pages as relevant for queries that that are happening right now? Maybe I need to reevaluate the content that I have, make sure that the freshest content is out there, that the page is crawled and indexed, and ready to go. It's ready to be ranked. So those are some questions that you might want to ask when you're looking at those different tools.
Yeah, and I assume some of the information you provided is quite technical. So do you think, is this the web? Who do you go back to ask this question if you're not as technical as someone who can dive into Google Analytics or into Google Search Console? Is this the web designer? Is it your marketing firm? Where do you go to kind of get those answers?
And those are kind of they're skills that I've started to develop over the last couple of years. But if you have an agency partner that you work with, usually your account manager, if you've got someone that is supposed to be your SEO lead, I think that person can certainly tell you, can give you that kind of insight. You can talk to your developers. I wouldn't really necessarily talk to a website designer so much as I would talk to the person who's worked on the code and at least can help you understand when Googlebot comes through, if they're able to look at those types of like log files. That gets really technical, but if they're able to see those types of things, they can kind of help you assess whether or not Googlebot has actually come through and crawled your pages.
Fantastic. So I know that Google announced some big changes, and I think it would be really helpful for the audience to hear about something that could really impact them as we move into 2021. It was kind of unprecedented, something called the Core Web Vitals. And I think everybody should know about that. And I'd heard you speak about that at a conference. What is this Core Web Vitals, and how could it make your rankings drop off? I mean, is it something, maybe just tell the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you brought that up. So, this is something that was really just recently announced to the street by Google. And this concept of Core Web Vitals, it's a new feature within Google Search Console. So also a really important aspect of being able to have access to that data, because that's a new tab, a new section within Search Console that you want to start playing around with and taking a look at that data. So, at a high level, this is really Google trying to make it easier for webmasters to understand the vital signs, across like the different tool sets that they try to provide. And these are basic things like page speed, mobile friendliness, right? So the two really important things to note here about this kind of announcement is that Core Web Vitals will be incorporated into Google's ranking algorithm. That's what we're hearing. We already know that something like page speed is a ranking factor. So that's why you want to start getting familiar with this data, start understanding how it's looking at your website. What are the things you need to be, sprucing up before next year? And the other piece of that is just the timeline, right? So Google has said that they'll try to give at least 6 months notice before these signals start taking effect in 2021. But the fact that it's already available in Search Console really just means like dive in, get in there and see what's going on. Start having those conversations with your teams to, get familiar with where your website can stand to be improved in terms of these signals. I actually wanted to give a quick shout out. I tweeted an article that Marie Haynes Consulting did a roundup on this topic, and it's great. So again, more more links for your users, more resources. I love to share good information, and they did a really great article to kind of sum this up. So might be good to bookmark that.
Fantastic, thank you. And so the big takeaway is more and more users are moving to mobile. That's pretty obvious trend. Google's really concerned about that user experience. You've got to make sure you've got your mobile experience. In fact, when you design your website, you really should be designing it for mobile first. And there are lots of trends around mobile. Is there anything, if you compared, say, 2020 versus 2019, like some big changes that you're seeing out there? Anything that the listeners should be concerned about?
The biggest change between 2020 and 2019 is COVID, is the pandemic. That has been something that really, it's the elephant in the room for a lot of people, and it's caused such a change in search trends and a shift from, retail goods or people buying more retail goods. So that's the biggest thing that I think marketers really need to be aware of is this is an external factor that, is really, it's changing everyone's life in lots of different ways. And so being able to provide helpful information, reliable information, accurate information, good products and services. That's really what people are really looking for. And it's only going to continue to just, from Google's perspective, they just want to provide a fast, great, seamless user experience. And so in a nutshell, those are the things that you kind of have to be, always working towards.
Fantastic, Holly. You come with so much wisdom, so many great things. You told us a little bit about Jessica Bellman's book and Mary Haynes's blogs. Any other resources that you'd like to recommend to our listeners that they read on a regular basis?
Yes. So I hope I don't leave anybody out. I know a lot of great people in the industry. And so I am not the smartest person in the room, but I love being able to, learn from other people and read their blogs. So some of the people that I think your users would really benefit from, following or reading their blogs is one by Glenn Gabe, another one from AJ Kahn. Andrew Shotland is really great if you have a local business. He's absolutely, has a very, very good understanding. He's been in the industry a long time about local search in particular. Eli Schwartz is also a really great resource. He blogs quite a bit. And Bill, I hope I don't butcher his name too much, but Bill Flosky he is with, I think, Go Fish Digital. So he's a veteran in the SEO world and also looks at Google patents and kind of tries to understand what Google's trying to do with certain patents. It's fascinating. So he's a very, very smart man.
Well, Holly Miller Anderson, I could speak to you for hours. You're such an interesting person, and you bring so much great depth and so many interesting aspects to those of us that are interested in SEO. Thank you so much for speaking to us today about what happens if there are changes in rankings and traffic and conversions in your website. How can listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to find out more about you and about your Twitter feed and all these other areas? How do they get hold of you?
I do maintain a public Twitter profile, so I would love it if you would follow me. My Twitter handle is @MillerTime_baby. And I follow lots of great people, so I would love it if you would follow me, and you can find me there. You can also find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me there if you have any specific questions about your website or anything related to search.
Again, Holly, thank you so much for joining us today. That's Holly Miller Anderson, SEO expert and someone with such a lot of depth and years of experience in SEO. Thank you so much for joining us today on Digital Breakthroughs podcast.
Thank you, Bernard. I had a wonderful time. Thank you.
National Positions is an award-winning performance-based marketing agency based in Los Angeles, Dallas, and New York. Our creative campaigns have fueled real-world results for our clients across all industries and have even been recognized by the Academy of Interactive and Visual Arts. Our mission is simple: to grow your brand using strategies 100% tailored to your needs and goals. For our listeners to this podcast, we are offering a special 1-hour free audit or consultation with one of our digital marketing experts. Please contact us at 877-866-6699. That's 877-866-6699, or visit our website at nationalpositions.com.
You've been listening to Digital Breakthroughs, featuring experts in all the areas of cutting-edge digital marketing. Digital Breakthroughs is hosted by Bernard May, CEO of leading social media and digital marketing agency, National Positions, located online at nationalpositions.com.